Good evening, everyone. We're going to call tonight's meeting to order. We're going to start with a motion to approve tonight's agenda, please. Councillor Andrews and Deputy Mayor Taylor, all in favor? That's carried unanimously. Any disclosures of direct or indirect pecuniary interest? Deputy Mayor Taylor?
Yes, when we get to the grant period, I don't have it in front of me just yet, I apologize, but when we're speaking about the grants for the Optimists, I'll have to declare, and it's because I've been a member for over 20 years in that club.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. We had no closed meeting today, so if you are able, please rise for the singing of our national anthem.
O Canada, our home and native land, true patriot love in all of us command. With glowing hearts we see thee rise, the true north strong and free. From far and wide, O Canada, we stand on guard for thee. God keep our land glorious and free. O Canada, we stand on guard for thee. O Canada, we stand on guard for thee.
Thank you all. We would like to acknowledge the treaty lands and territory of the Williams Treaty Nation and the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. We also recognize that Dufferin County is home to the traditional territory of the Wendat and Haudenosaunee and is home to many Indigenous people today. Tonight's meeting is being aired on public television and or streamed live and may be taped for later public broadcast or webcast. Your name is part of the public record and will be included in the minutes of tonight's meeting. Any member of the public connecting via telephone is reminded to press *6 to mute and unmute. Please remain muted until the chair requests comments or questions from the public. Next up on the agenda, we need to adopt the minutes of the previous council meeting, which is from May 1st. Can I have a motion to approve that, please? Councillor Stevens and Councillor McIntosh, was there any questions or comments? I'll call the vote then. All in favor? And that's carried unanimously. We'll move into the presentations, petitions, and delegations, and we will start with Mr. Murray Short, who's a partner at RLB, and will present our draft audited financial statements. Mr. Short is joining us via Teams. Over to you, Mr. Short. Welcome to the meeting.
Thank you, Mayor Post. Members of Council, appreciate the opportunity to present the draft audited financial statements along with our presentation. What I'll propose to do is walk through the presentation, which covers the primary statements within the financial statements themselves, as well as some key metrics. And then as we go, then I'll kind of jump to the financial statements and cover off some of the notes and additional schedules from there. So I will just share my screen here if I can. And you should now be seeing, or very shortly be seeing, the cover page of the presentation.
Yes, we can see it.
Okay, excellent. Okay, so first off, I would like to thank the team at the Town of Orangeville. Obviously, as I've said before, the audit's an onerous process on your finance team, as well as various other staff throughout the organization. And so thank them for getting us to this point. We certainly aim to kind of be able to present the audited financial statements by this time. But it's a lot of work on their part to get us to this point. So thank you to them for that. So I have a bit of an agenda here for the presentation, just a bit of an overview on the audit process itself, just a few words on the audit report itself, and then the financial statements, and talk about next steps. And then, as I said, I can jump to the financial statements and just walk through some of the additional information that's not within the presentation. So first off, from the standpoint of our audit process, our materiality is $2.2 million. So that's a number that's based on the overall assets of the organization. And from there, then that's what allows us to sign off on our audit report. So we could conceivably have do the testing to allow us to kind of confirm that within that realm, within that range of error, that we are confident that the financial statements are presented fairly. But in actual fact, when we're looking at our testing and analysis, we're looking at numbers much lower than that, and ultimately didn't have any significant misstatements ultimately within the draft financial statements. We did provide a pre-audit communication letter to council back in the fall that highlighted some of the key planning issues as far as our audit plan for the coming year, and there were no changes in any of the information there that affected our audit plan from what was previously communicated. We also didn't have any internal control deficiencies to communicate, so we've been through all of the work that we've needed to do, and we're satisfied that the processes around the financial reporting are sufficient for us to be able to sign off on our audit report. It is important for us to confirm our independence from the town of Orangeville. As auditors, we need to be independent of the organization and have no vested interest in the financial results. And that allows us to have an unbiased opinion when we're kind of approaching the audit itself. And so we are confirming that we had no issues with independence. In terms of adjusting entries, just for council's information, we did have 11 entries that came through our audit process. Those are other than those that were brought to our attention by management throughout the audit process, but those all kind of revolved around the things that we book every year. So kind of adjustment of the reserve funds, obligatory reserve funds, your tangible asset activity, and so on, that are usually kind of involved, or what we adjust over the course of our audit process and have over the last several years. In terms of the audit report is a clean audit opinion. It is the same audit report as you would have seen in prior years. The wording is identical with the exception of the fact that we're reporting on 2022 versus 2021, but subject to that, it is identical. It is a clean audit opinion. We've done the analysis and testing that we need to do to be able to sign off on our audit report. And so in the audited financial statements themselves, you'll see that the report indicates that the financial statements are presented fairly in accordance with Canadian public sector accounting standards. And just to confirm that our audit itself is conducted in accordance with the applicable auditing standards, Canadian generally accepted auditing standards. So with that, then I'll get into the financial statements and some of the key metrics as mentioned. The first statement in the financial statements is the statement of financial position. It shows the financial assets at the top of the page, the liabilities in the middle, and then the non-financial assets at the bottom. And the net of those things is the accumulated surplus. And you can see that here. So I'll highlight a few things in particular. If you take the top three lines in total, we're combining the cash, restricted cash, and temporary investments. At the end of 2022, those totaled about 103 million as compared to about 75 million the year before. So that's an increase of about 28 million. And you won't be surprised to hear that that's largely coming from the sale of various lands from ORDC. So RDC and the various other local boards, the BIA, the library board, and so on, are consolidated within these financial statements. And so the increase in cash is coming from the sale of those lands by ORDC in the year. Below those three lines, we have various other financial assets. Your taxes receivable balance is up by about 430,000. That's about 18% year over year. I will say that sounds like a lot, but it's pretty consistent across what we're seeing for various of our other municipal clients. In fact, it's almost bang on what I've seen in the files that we've completed so far. Some of them slightly less, but then there's some that are up in the 20% range. So 18% for whatever reason seems to be the norm for this year in terms of increases in taxes owing. Part of that may be from supplemental taxes levied towards the end of the year, and so that might be part of the increase. But it does seem to be fairly consistent that there's been an increase in receivables at the end of the year from taxes. Just below that, we have other accounts receivable. So that may be things like grants. In this case, it's up, you can see, by about $2.8 million. Part of that is Orangeville Hydro billings. There's 3 months outstanding versus 2, an increase in the HST rebates that the town is able to collect, as well as various other amounts, some amounts from an ORDC sale outstanding at the end of the year in particular. And the last financial asset is your investment in Orangeville Hydro itself. That balances up because of your share of the profits of Orangeville Hydro increasing, net of the dividends that the town does receive, and so that increased about $250,000. In the middle section, we have the liabilities. You can see that accounts payable are up somewhat as well, about $2.5 million. That increase being largely because of capital activity, and that's where we typically see the swings with our municipal government clients in accounts payable. It just depends on what capital projects are on the go towards the end of the year, one year versus the next, tends to be what causes the major swings, and that increases because there was more capital projects with payables outstanding at the end of this year versus last. Deferred revenue, you can see, is very consistent. We'll get to that in the slides, but that is comprised of things like your development charges and gas tax. In total, pretty comparable, but 21.4, 21.5 million versus 21.8. But you will see that there's a bit of a difference in the mix, some up, some down. The municipality did add 3 new loans in the year for the police station, the fire station, and the Centennial property. So in total, long-term debt up somewhat to 31.7 million from just under 30 million. And we'll see that in the notes to the financial statements. The rest of the loans that the municipality had were just paid down over the regular repayment schedules, as we would expect. And just at the bottom of the liabilities, we have some unfunded liabilities. There's post-employment benefits. So this is an actuarial estimate of future costs for the municipality for post-employment benefits for employees. You can see that balance is down by about 700,000. That's as a result of the municipality no longer operating the Orangeville Police Service and the reduction in employees coming from that when that's police services were outsourced to the OPP. And then there's a landfill post-closure liability. So that's, again, an estimate of future costs related to post-closure activity at landfill sites, and that bounces up slightly. So the net of all of those financial assets and liabilities is your net financial asset position. That bounces up by about 29 million, again, because of the increase in cash arising from the sale of RDC properties. Down at the bottom, we have the non-financial assets. The one that I'll highlight is your tangible capital assets. So that's your infrastructure and buildings and vehicles and all those sorts of things. $23 million in new asset additions versus $8 million of amortization. So you can see that those tangible capital assets have increased overall by about $12 million. And correspondingly, with the increase in your net financial assets, your overall accumulated surplus has increased because of the gain on sale of the ORDC properties. So getting to some of the graphs, the first one is showing cash equivalents as a percentage of annual cash outflows. So the cash equivalents are your cash, restricted cash, and investments, those 3 lines at the top of the last statement. And basically, if you add those up, they're enough to cover 140% of your annual cash outflows. So you could cover more than a year's worth of your cash outflows, but that's pretty consistent with where you've been in the last few years. You see that it does jump up, the green line here, up to 140 from 124.6, again, because of the sale of those properties. And comparing to comparable townships, in your case, we're comparing to various municipalities of comparable size. And you can see that they're sitting about 120%. So your cash position is certainly stronger than the comparables that we used in your case. So the next slide is taxes receivable as a percentage of total tax levied. So this is taking your tax receivable and comparing it to the taxes that you levy, not just for your own purposes, but for the purposes of the funds that you're raising for the county and school boards. And you can see that your balance is lower than those comparable townships. It did increase somewhat, as I said, that 18% increase that we're seeing across our client base. But when compared to those comparable municipalities that we're looking as a comparison group, you're still well below that. And just to point out that the Ministry of Municipal Affairs and Housing considers anything less than 10% to be low risk. You're at 4.1, so well below that. And so that's a really strong position to be in terms of collections on your taxes receivable, despite the bit of an increase that we saw this year. Long-term debt as a percentage of total tax revenue. And the reason we're comparing to total tax revenue is trying to normalize for the size of municipalities. We are taking municipalities that are comparably sized in terms of tax revenue and population. So should be a fairly good comparison when you're combining those things. You do have a bit more in tax, a bit more in long-term debt than other municipalities. Certainly well within what we'd consider to be the normal range, though. And so we're not concerned with that. And again, when you cross-reference that against the cash position, which is stronger, you're certainly not over-leveraged from that standpoint. In terms of capital asset additions as a percentage of total tax revenue, you can see that Orangeville is below the comparable municipalities. I do caution when I make these presentations that every municipality is different. Different municipalities have different municipal services and infrastructure, and so this may be not even remotely a reason for concern. And you can see that particularly in last year, you're kind of within striking distance of the other municipalities. So it's not a judgment call that you should be spending more or not. Just a reference point to provide the comparison. And this slide is showing your capital asset additions versus budget and versus amortization. I tend to focus on the blue and yellow here, capital asset additions versus your amortization. And generally speaking, we communicate that we'd like to see the blue line be above the yellow more often than not. And you can see that in the last 5 years, the blue bar here has been higher than the yellow one in 4 out of 5. So that's a good sign. It means you're spending more on capital asset additions than the amortization of your existing capital assets. It's not a great or a perfect comparison by any means, but at least it suggests that you're spending more than the amortization, that you're doing what you can to keep up with your infrastructure needs. And so I think that's a positive. Lastly, this graph just shows capital asset additions by funding source. So the green bars here are your reserves and reserve funds. That's funding more than half of, and typically at least half of your capital asset additions. There are various other sources that will vary from one year to the next, but that's just showing those sources of funding for the capital asset additions that you do have. So the next statement is the statement of operations. So it shows the revenues and expenditures. It also shows the budget, which we normalize or reconcile to these financial statements. What's presented in your budget presentation is based on cash flow needs. The financial statements under public sector accounting standards are presented on a different basis. So we kind of tie it in the notes, but ultimately we're kind of taking your budget and kind of making it fit within the accounting standards that are required in these financial statements. But with that said, that comparison is provided as well as the comparison to prior year, as we'll see here. And so you can see a number of things that stick out. In particular, your revenues up significantly from both budget and prior year. Again, ORDC is the explanation for that. In note number 12, you can see in the other income, the gain on sale of those railway lands was about $28 million. And so that makes up most of the $36 million that you see in other income. Up at the top, we have taxation revenue. That was just shy of budget, but pretty well bang on what you'd budgeted for it to be in the year, but up a fair amount from last year, about 3.4% overall. So that's a reasonable and fair increase. The fees and user charges just above budget, on the other hand, at $17.3 million. But that's up fairly substantially from last year. And there's a number of reasons for that. Not surprisingly, recreational services user fees were up coming out of COVID, which was obviously much more of an impact in 2021 than it was in 2022. Some surplus payments from WSIB, rental incomes, and various other things were up on the fees and user charges line. Grants also up from last year, but below budget. The municipality had budgeted to do even more capital expenditures than it had actually done in the year. So the grants are down somewhat, but up from last year. And it's an increase in capital funding, a decrease in operating funding from those grants that we'll see in note number 13. The other income I'll get to in the notes, and then the equity income from Orangeville Hydro. So that's your share of the income from Orangeville Hydro in the year, about 706,000 this year versus about 917,000 last year. On the expense side, you can see that expenses are up about $4 million or $4.4 million from last year, but below budget. The reasons for that, the increase you can see is largely on the rec side, almost $2 million increase in rec. So again, with things reopening in 2022, we're seeing kind of fairly consistently across our clients an increase in the recreational user fee revenues, but also recreational costs. Generally speaking, the rest of your expenses fairly close to in line from last year, with some increase in materials and services from the inflation impacts that we're seeing across the board in 2022 versus 2021. So net of all of these things is a surplus on the year of about $40.8 million. Again, the ORDC sales and the gains on those sales not budgeted, and so you were budgeting for about 14 as compared to 10 last year. But the gain on those, the sale of those ORDC lands, creating that much bigger surplus than anticipated. So this graph just shows expenditures by department, just to kind of give a sense of kind of the fact that as a kind of diverse municipality with a number of different services offered, that there are kind of a wide range of expenses through the various departments. And those, this is showing the 5-year comparison of those over time. And generally we see they're fairly consistent from one year to the next, as you would expect. So the next statement is the statement of changes in net financial assets. So this kind of takes the $40 million surplus or $40.8 million surplus and backs out the capital asset activity to show the change in your net financial assets. So once you kind of take away the gain on the sale of RDC and the proceeds on the sale, the acquisition of tangible capital assets versus amortization, you wind up with a net increase in net financial assets of $28.7 or $28.8 million. Again, corresponding very closely to the gain on sale on the ORDC lands. The last main statement is the statement of cash flows. I won't go through it in much detail at all. I'll just highlight positive cash flow from operating activities of $18.5 million, largely because of the surplus. And then from that, you have cash used in financing activities or produced or provided by financing activities. The new loans taken out that I alluded to earlier, exceeding the amount that was repaid on the other loans. And so overall, your debt increased by about $1.9 million. We have capital activities. So you spent $22 or $23 million on capital assets, but you had total proceeds on the sale of other capital assets, including the RDC lands, of $30.7 million. So that's a net increase in cash of $7.7 million. And then investing activities, you got dividends from Orangeville Hydro of just over 450,000, I should say. So your cash increased by that $28.6 million that you see down at the bottom, up to the $103 million that I mentioned at the outset. So Schedule 3 of the financial statements is the schedule of accumulated surplus. So this shows the overall accumulated surplus of $286,000, up from the $245,000 the year before because of the surplus on the year. Most of the surplus or accumulated surplus of the town is its investment in tangible capital assets. There's various other amounts, your unfunded post-employment and post-closure costs, general surplus of $6.3 million, your equity in Orangeville Hydro, and then your reserves and reserve funds, which total $80 million, up from just under $60 million the year before, again, because of ORDC. The funds gained on the sale of those lands going into reserves for future use. I mentioned the $40 million annual surplus on the year, but 6.3 of that or 6.4 of that is the general surplus. That's the surplus that your finance team will be making a recommendation on in terms of transferring balances to reserves and so on. That would be obviously after the year end, so that won't be reflected in these financial statements, but that's the generally what happens is the finance committee makes recommendation, or the finance team makes recommendations on how to use that surplus after the financial statement presentation. So deferred revenue, as I mentioned, is comprised of things like your development charges, unspent development charges, gas tax funding, and so on. This is money that you've received that you're contractually or by legislation obligated to spend on particular purposes and for particular reasons. And so it's deferred revenue because it becomes revenue when it's spent on those things. So in the meantime, it is deferred until such time as it's spent. And so this is the components of that. Development charges being the largest balance, ending the year at about $10.5 million. That is down from about 11.8 at the start of the year or at the end of last year, because you spent about $3.3 million out of that development charges reserve fund in the year versus about 1.7 million in development charges collected in the year. You can see various other components, your federal gas tax, MTO transit program, transportation grants, and so on. And so those have all changed based on amounts received in terms of some of those grants and then spent out of those reserve funds. And so in total, your obligatory reserve funds ended the year at about 18.8 million versus 19.25 the year before. And then down below that, we have various other amounts, some other smaller grants. Tax levies are amounts received in advance, so prepayments of taxes for 2023 that were received in 2022, and those totaled about $2 million. And then various other deposits, so the total of those other amounts is $2.6 million, and total deferred revenue, 21.4. So this graph just shows the total of your reserves and reserve funds as a percentage of total revenue. So this combines both the reserves and reserve funds that I showed on the last slide in the obligatory reserve funds, as well as the discretionary reserve funds that we saw in the statement of or schedule of accumulated surplus. The total of those amounts to about 251% of your total tax revenue. And so that is up substantially, again, because of ORDC, but also a fair amount higher than the average of the comparables that we looked at. So those comparable municipalities had about 208%, you're at 251. So a fair amount set aside in reserves and reserve funds, again, with the caution that, you know, as accountants, we're looking backwards, we're looking at kind of what's there, not what your future needs are. So I wouldn't comment on what your needs as a municipality might be relative to other municipalities of your size to say what's sufficient or what's not. But certainly just commenting that you do have more on average set aside in reserves and reserve funds than other municipalities of your size. So that's a good financial position to be in. In terms of next steps, so we've presented the draft financial statements today. We've been through the audit process. In order to finalize the financial statements, we do need council's approval of the draft financial statements, at which point then we'll ask management to sign off on our representation letter. That allows us to issue the final signed version of the financial statements and puts us in a good position to submit the financial information return for the May 31st due date to the Ministry of Municipal Affairs and Housing. So with that, happy to answer any questions now, or I can jump into the financial statements and just kind of cover off some of the notes and schedules that I haven't covered, which I promise will not take much time at all. But I will leave it to your discretion as to whether we do that or take some questions now.
Thank you, Mr. Short. We will take a couple of questions first, I think, and we will be dealing with 12.1 before we go to the next delegation and try and get everything all done at one time. Deputy Mayor, you had a question. Councillor Andrews. Councillor Sherwood.
Thank you. Were you giving it to me? Yeah, thank you, Your Worship. Nice to see you again, Mr. Short. Just a quick question. First of all, the report's so easy. Thank you. Very, very simple in the way you describe it. It's very easy to follow along. I'm always interested whenever we talk about these things because a bunch of different groups present to us and they always talk about the other townships. So I know this is a little bit off course, but who did you use as the other townships?
I was thinking as I was presenting that somebody was going to ask this question, and that was one question I did not prepare for in advance. But I will look that up, and I will get an answer for you as quickly as I can here.
If I may, sir, I'll just tell you why it's important to us is we're always in this conversation about who is the comparators. And if sometimes if we use southern areas within Ontario, they don't necessarily apply to where we live, which is, more expensive than St. Thomas or Woodstock or those typical ones. So I was just curious what your bucket was, and it's not a criticism either way. I'm just interested in knowing.
Yeah. Okay. So I have them here. I just needed a few minutes or a couple seconds to open up the spreadsheet we have. So the comparators we used were Bradford, West Gwillimbury, Center Wellington, Leamington, Whitchurch, Stouffville, Wilmot, Woodstock, and Woolwich. So I think generally in this kind of approximate geography, I think when we created the comparators at this council's request, because what we had previously shown, as you might recall, was comparison to the average of our clients, which tend to be smaller municipalities. So going back a handful of years, I think council directed us to present kind of comparably sized municipalities. And so we kind of changed the comparators from that standpoint. And we've used the same comparators over the last, 4 years or so that we've been showing this presentation.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor, do you have a follow-up? No. Councillor Andrews.
Thank you very much, Your Worship. I echo Deputy Taylor's comment to Mr. Short. Always a pleasure to see you, and the detailed information very, very helpful. Just wanted to zero in on one comment that you made, and that was referencing the grants themselves. And what I've noticed is, of course, 2021 versus 2022 budget and then actual. And there seems to be some ebbs and flows, and so too, again, the Deputy Mayor's comment about the comparators. Did you see anything that was out of the ordinary? And I'll just follow up with this comment. The areas of grants that I noticed that we saw some decline in the actual in 2022, I would assume that it would have something to do with the COVID payments that may have come from the different levels of government, be that provincial or federal.
Yeah, that's what we're tending to see. So what we typically in any year would see a lot of fluctuation is the capital grants. You apply for capital grants, you're awarded some, you're not awarded others, and so what you might get and what you can then obviously afford to invest in terms of new infrastructure will vary based on what you're awarded. Operating grants tend to be a little more stable, except over the last few years where the COVID grants certainly were significantly greater in 2020 and 2021 than they would have been this year. And so a lot of the decrease that you see in some of those grants would have been as a result of that.
Thank you very much.
Yep.
Sherwood? Okay. Councillor McIntosh, did you have something as well? No. Okay, then we will go into your next reports there, Mr. Short,
Sure.
if you'd like.
Yep. Okay, so I will share my screen again. I'll just walk through some of the notes and additional information, the financial statements. Again, it'll be really quick. It's just kind of supplementary information to the main statements themselves. So I'm jumping through to page number 33. So I've jumped through most of the financial statements that are in the council package because they were all covered in the presentation to this point. So just to highlight that. In terms of some of those notes, your temporary investments, conservatively invested largely in term deposits and money market funds, making up the total of those investments. Your investment in government business enterprises, just your investment in Orangeville Hydro. And so there's just some information there. We provide the deferred revenue note I showed you already. The post-employment benefits. So this is your liability for post-employment costs for employees when they retire or leave the municipality, and the changes there. the reduction coming as a result, again, of Orangeville Police Service. Post-employment benefits are done based on actuarial estimates, so there's some information on the kind of discount rates and so on. And then the long-term debt, as mentioned, 3 new loans, this one here for Centennial, and then 2 loans for the police and fire stations, but otherwise the rest of the loans generally paid down over their regular repayment schedules, and those expected repayments based on maturity dates and so on, shown in the 5-year timeline here. We have some notes on the pension agreement. Obviously, the municipality has members of its staff on the OMERS pension plan, and so we have some information on that plan in note number 9. The landfill post-closure just highlights the fact that you have landfill sites that you need to maintain, and then will incur costs post-closure as well. So just the assumptions made in calculating that liability. We have the note on the funds raised for and paid out to the county and the school boards, and the changes in those from year to year. And then the other income note, again, this number here is the one that sticks out, the $27.7 or $27.8 million. The vast majority of that being sale of ORDC lands that created the most of the surplus experienced in the year. The grants note, just back to the question, overall budgeted for higher grants than what you received, but your grants that you did receive were greater than what you received last year. Most of the increase being on the capital side, the decrease being on the operating side, and again, a significant component of that being as a result of the COVID loans available in previous years. Trust funds are separate statements at the back, so I'll just skip over this because those are covered later. We have information on Orangeville Hydro itself, so just kind of highlighting its some of its key financial statement items, just required disclosure because you do have a controlling interest. And then we have a note on financial risk management that just highlights the dates that certain receivables are outstanding on the credit risk side, and then payables are due on the liquidity side. These are all kind of within normal ranges and what we'd expect based on your receivables and payables. The budget note is how we kind of go from your zero-based budget that you budget for on an annual basis to what actually occurred in terms of resulting in the $6.3 million general surplus. And again, that will be part of the presentation by your finance team. And then we have some schedules. I'm just jumping ahead a bit here. So some schedules that just give a bit more information to what I've already presented. This schedule shows revenues by department, whereas in the statement of operations, it's shown by type. So taxation, revenue, fees, user charges, and grants. But this breaks it out by department, just so you can see that across various departments. On the expense side, the statement of operations shows it by department. So this shows the components of that in terms of whether it's staffing or materials and supplies or what it might be with comparatives from the prior year. And then the tangible capital asset schedule just shows the activity in the year, almost $23 million spent on new capital assets. You had the disposals in the year and then your amortization. And so the net of those things is the increase up to $224 million from $212 million the year before. This is the schedule accumulated surplus that I showed you. And then we just have the trust fund statements. And all I will say about those as I get to them, bit of an increase overall. The fund balance is up to about 3.8 million from just under 3.2, and that arising because of receipts of about 1.1 million versus expenditures out of them of about 500,000. So an increase overall in those fund balances of about 650,000. Those are funds held in trust by the municipality for cemeteries and various things. And so those are obviously restricted to those purposes and not included within the town's general financial statements. So I will stop sharing again, and if there's any further questions, happy to answer those. But thank you again for the opportunity to present.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Short. Before we go to more questions, I'd like to get a motion on the floor. The one that's included in 12.1 is that report CPS-2023-35 regarding the 2022 audited financial statements be received, and that council approve the audited consolidated financial statements of the corporation of the town of Orangeville and the statements of trust as presented, and that council direct finance staff to allocate the 2022 general surplus of $5,869,792 to the General Capital Reserve Fund. Can I have a motion, please? Councillor Andrews and Deputy Mayor Taylor. Was there additional questions? Councillor Sherwood, did you want to go with yours now?
Yes, Your Worship, thank you. I guess it's more of a comment than anything. I was quite surprised to see the surplus amount. And I guess my first thought is that had we known that we were going to end up with this kind of surplus, I think our discussions at our budget time would have been significantly different. And I just wonder if, because this makes quite a bit of difference percentage-wise in tax levy increases. And had we known this, I think we could have dealt with that budget differently. Does staff not have a general perception when they're giving us the budget of a good guesstimate that this type of surplus would be coming? Because this is pretty big.
Ms. Landry, would you like to take that one?
Good evening, everyone. At that time, they don't have that particular information because of the timing of when we're actually doing and entering into our budget preparation and then our discussions, because this information follows afterwards, Councillor Sherwood. Certainly, we can undertake to have a better understanding as we move forward and consider that as part of the timing of when we come forward with budget. But if you could leave that with us, certainly as part of this upcoming budget process, we can let you know what we can do moving forward to help assist in that regard, if that would be fair.
Thank you, Ms. Landry. Was there additional questions or comments? Deputy Mayor Taylor?
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. I just have one, and it might be for the Hydro Board people that are here. It could be for Ms. Landry, but I'm always thinking about investments, and I liked where you were going, Councillor Sherwood, and then just one add on to it is, if I were to invest in the Royal Bank, just bear with me for a moment, the Royal Bank pays me a 5% dividend. Let's just assume it does. If the stock price goes up from $100, let's assume it's $100, and it goes up to $150, the Royal Bank would increase its dividend so that they would stay around the 5% marker. That's what our banks do. And utilities are somewhat of a boring thing as well. And Orangeville Hydro, to me, is boring. It's exciting that it's boring because we get money from, like, boring things give you money. It's always bothered me, and Orangeville Hydro isn't here, but it just touched on me here in this report. The amount that Orangeville Hydro continues to go up is great. That's awesome. It's worth more each year. It's great. Our dividends fluctuate in a significant range. 2 years ago, it was 511,000. Last year, I need to make it up. It was either 423 or 432. Can't recall. But that means that it was essentially, X percent. And then the next year, it's X percent less, essentially a percent. Let's assume it was 5, and then the next year it's 4 for round math. I wish that we would peg it and say the utility is worth X. Our dividend should be 5 or 4.5. And then we could plan and we would know. Whereas right now it fluctuates from year to year. And I ask the question, and I'm very polite, and I ask it each time. I never truly understand how we come to our dividend. It's a great thing. It just could be better. It could be better. And it would only be better by, I don't know, a couple $100,000. So on the size of our budget, it's not really that big of a deal, but it would be helpful, right, to know what it is. So my suggestion to the Orangeville Hydro Board would be, can we not peg it to the size of our business or to the size of the asset or to the size of the profit, something along those lines, and say it's worth X percentage? And I know nobody, maybe outside of Ms. Landry, can answer that here, but I think it's something that we should take back as the oversight board and ask that our utility that we own 95% of does a better job of giving us consistent income. Because again, back to the Royal Bank, if the Royal Bank fluctuated like that, the stock price would plummet, right? And that's essentially what this is it's worth, the asset is worth a certain amount of money. And I'm sorry to talk in circles. I hope everybody grasped what I was trying to say as an example, but I think we could be more consistent with that.
I'm going to turn it over to Councillor McIntosh. He's been on the hydro board much longer than me and has a better grasp of how all of that works. So he's generously said that he can answer that too a little bit.
Well, I'll attempt to answer it. First of all, the actual hydro rate is not set by Orangeville Hydro, it's set by the provincial government, so that can fluctuate without us having any say in it. The dip this year is caused by a mistake that was made in the billing. I won't take that back. It's not a mistake. It was an overbilling many, many years ago, so that had to be paid back. That come out of our dividends, so that's the reason for the dip this year. But as far as other years, there's different expenses, I guess, that they do, and that makes it fluctuate.
You want to take that again, Deputy Mayor?
My request is that you take it back, and I think it should come back and it should be more consistent. Because again, if the Royal Bank wasn't paying its shareholders what they were expecting, there's consequences, right? And the stock drops or people are let go. And I'm not suggesting we're letting anybody go, but there's consequences. And right now it goes too much. And it would be great on our financials if we knew what it was, not the amount, the percentage. Yeah. Anyway.
I'm sure we can have Mr. Kokok here one day. He likes to come and talk about dividends and all things hydro. So I'm sure we could invite him here for that. Yeah. Was there any additional questions before we call the vote? All in favor? And that's carried unanimously. Thank you very much, Mr. Short, for being here today. We look forward to seeing you again soon.
Great. Thank you very much.
At this time, we will move on to 11.2, and I will ask Deputy Mayor Taylor to leave as he's declared a conflict, and we will deal with 12.2 immediately following the delegation. So I will invite Dennis Cox from the Optimist Club of Orangeville up to the podium to speak about the grant application. Mr. Cox, if you just want to have a seat and turn on the microphone, there should be a button there to turn it on, and then it is over to you.
My name is Dennis Cox, and I'm representing the Optimist Club of Orangeville. Thank you, Mayor Post and Council, for letting the Optimist Club present our request for the 2023 grant program. This will be our 31st year of hosting Christmas in the Park. And over the years, thanks to the support of the town, we have strived to add enhanced lighting and additional new displays to improve the event every year. Presently, we meet weekly and are working on 2 new displays, along with making additional Christmas trees, artificial Christmas trees for the Bethia and John Street gates. We do have a people counter installed on the covered bridge in the park, and we attract in the neighborhood of 24,000 people each December. Part of our involvement with Christmas in the Park is that as a club, the Optimists have taken an ownership approach to Casey Gardens. And over the years, we've initiated and built permanent structures in the park. They are the covered bridge, the pergola on the Bethia Street side, and the gazebo on the John Street side we did in 2004. The Stone Park entrance gates to both Bethia and John Street, we were part of the 2010 of those. A tree planting program started in 2017. We plant 2 trees annually in the park. Due to COVID, we caught up in 2022 and we planted 8 trees last year. A new pergola was built in 2021 on the John Street side of the park over by the pathway by Mill Creek. And in 2022, we installed a steel roof on the older pergola on Bethia Street side of the park, as the existing roof was starting to decay, and with the new roof over it, it'll be stable for years. We hosted a bench art contest in 2021 involving the Orangeville youth. Which saw all of the existing bench backs in the park covered with permanent art material that was done by Orangeville youth. And aside to this, in 2007, we also built a pergola on the pathway in Rotary Park beside the trail. We are requesting additional funds from last year's grant to undertake another permanent structure in the park, which is a dry stone structure. We've been in discussion with Eric Landman, who has done some wonderful dry stone structures in the area, notably the dry stone wall at Island Lake Memorial area, the dry stone structures at Headwaters Hospital and the Greenwood Cemetery. This is a project we hope to start by undertaking by 2024, but are requesting additional funds that are part of our Christmas in the Park grant this year and in next year, which would total in the neighborhood of $10,000 and would be set aside to get this project underway. The drawings Eric submitted with our request is just a sample of some of the work he does. But we are working with him on a number of ideas. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Cox. We will deal with the grant application at this time as well. Before I go to that, was there any questions for Mr. Cox at all? Councillor Sherwood?
Yes, Your Worship. You mentioned about drawings, but I didn't see any drawings attached to this. So was I the only one that missed that, or? Can you explain to me what this drywall is? I don't know what it is.
Have you been over to the memorial area in Island Lake, where Dodds and McNair have the memorial section? And there's a wall there that was made by Eric Landman. And that was a dedication to his wife. But he's done a number of other structures, and some of them are over by the hospital. He's done a structure with a big butterfly made of stone in it. And at the Greenwood Cemetery last fall, he made a structure at the entranceway. And we're just thinking of something in the park on a permanent structure with some design to it that would just enhance the park.
Councillor Sherwood?
And yes, Your Worship. So is it like a Christmassy theme?
No, it would be a permanent structure.
So for
Yeah.
all year, okay.
Yes.
Okay, I would have liked to have seen that drawing. It's disappointing that I don't know what we're
I think
looking
it's
at.
coming up, maybe. Perfect. Lindsay's looking to share it here. There we go.
So that structure, as you look, that's an overhead look of it. But so it goes out at four sides. It's got field stone at the end with quarry stone in the middle. The round part is a bench. And that's just one of his ideas that he came up with. We walked through the park. He knows the area that he would like to put the structure in, whether it be a wall with design in it or whether it's a bench type of area. But that's basically what we're looking at.
Is that helpful, Councillor Sherwood? Perfect. Was there additional questions? Councillor Andrews?
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship. Not a question, but more of a comment. I wanted to thank you very much for being here. I know that our community has benefited for 30 years of what happens at Casey Gardens, and it has been just a wonderful opportunity for our community and people from outside of our community to come in and celebrate the time of the year. And I will say candidly, this past year was the most spectacular I've seen. It was so well done. And again, kudos to every member of your organization and members of our community who have provided support. And I know that from a motion perspective, I will certainly be endorsing this request.
Thank you. Was there additional questions? No. So we will take 12.2 while Mr. Cox is still there, just in case there is any further questions. The recommendation in the agenda is that report CPS 2023-34 regarding community grant update be received and that council approve distribution of the 2023 community grant budgeted funds to the Optimist Club of Orangeville for $5,000 from multi-year grants and $10,000 from one-time grants, and that council approve the Out of the Cold community grant disbursement as a one-time grant. Can I get a motion in that? Councillor Andrews and seconded by Councillor Prendergast. Additional questions or comments? Councillor Sherwood?
Yes, Your Worship. I know that we are discussing the Optimist, but part of the recommendation is mentioning Out of the Cold community grant coming as a one-time grant. Perhaps Ms. Savage, you could explain to me the justification for switching that over? The Out of the Cold grant.
Ms. Savage?
Rather than being out of the multi-year, what was the reasoning for switching it over to the one-time?
Ms. Savage.
Through you, Mayor Post, Councillor Sherwood. What we're doing is I believe there's $11,000 coming out of the grant funding, the multi-year grant funding, but we're going to regroup with both the Choices Shelter and the county and the town to discuss how we can move forward with an agreement in place that will be funded, ideally by both parties, to continue with the Out of Cold program. So the funding source is still to be determined for future years. It's not known at this time until we have those conversations with the other two parties.
Okay. Any additional questions or comments? Yeah, I'll call the vote. All in favor? And that's carried unanimously. Thank you very much, Mr. Cox, for being here. And Mr. Mays, who I see in the background there. Thank you both for being here.
Thank you very
Have
much.
a wonderful evening. I will get Deputy Mayor Taylor back, but in the meantime, I will call up Mr. Ugolini, if you want to get up there, and you are next up to delegate. Thank you very much, Mr. Ugolini. Welcome. The floor is yours. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor. And
Can you just pull the mic over to you a little bit more so we can hear you? Thank you so much.
I can speak louder.
Oh, that's good. They have to be able to hear you over YouTube as well.
Thank you, Mayor and council members and town staff. I'm here tonight to speak about the sensitive receptor registry, which is something that I'm passionate about. People with sensitivity to odors such as smoke, perfume, flowers, shampoo, laundry detergents, rubber, pollen, to name just a few, can cause headaches, nausea, and can become prisoner in their own home with windows closed, AC on, and using the hydrogrid. People who are sensitive to smoke have just as much right to enjoy their backyard as people with people with burn permits. If people were burning responsibly, there would be less smoke. People who burn skids with possible chemical contamination, green wood, painted wood, pressure treated wood, leaves, and garbage. How do you know a neighbor is using sensitive receptor to use as a weapon? What is the proof that neighbors are using this as an irritant simply because the person who wanted the burn permit said so? I'm not saying it can't happen, but it is just a case of he said, she said. Many buildings ban scented products because the people that work in them are sensitive to the smells. Just in the last 4 days, I personally created unknowingly a problem for my wife by setting up some rubber mats by her swing. I did not realize that she would be sensitive to them, and of course she got sick with headache and nausea, and I promptly removed the mats and disposed of them. The people with sensitivities don't necessarily have a medical condition. You could just as be sensitive. Oh, you could just as well be sensitive as well. I'm losing my spot here. Probably many people in town have sensitivities and or medical conditions and do not realize they have to suffer in silence. Sensitive receptor is not a bad thing. It makes Orangeville special and a great place to live. Can you, please help me protect my wife and others in town with sensitivities? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ugolini. I appreciate you being here today. I think we've got a couple of comments or questions from council, and I just wanted to make the comment too as well, Mr. Ugolini. At this point, I just want to be clear to anybody, because I have gotten a couple of phone calls about this as well. Council is not looking at eliminating the sensitive receptor program. We're looking at finding a way to make it better so that it is better for the people who require it, so that it is a more fulsome program that's easier to implement, that makes the jobs of our fire team easier. To make sure that people are using it for the appropriate time. So we aren't looking to abolish the sensitive receptor program. We're just looking to make sure that it's working the way that it was intended to work. Councillor McIntosh.
Thank you, Worship. I was going to echo some of the same things. I've had a couple of phone calls on this. I don't know where the misconception is that we're doing away with the sensitive receptor. That was never discussed and was never planned. We're just going to make it better and fairer for everybody. So I just want to go on record as saying that. Mr. Ugolini, you mentioned people burning skids, painted wood, etc. Those people do not have permits. We have no control on those people at all unless somebody complains. So if people are burning skids, burning in fire pits, things like that, they do not have fire permits. So we can't maintain that or keep an eye on that sort of thing unless people like you phone and complain. So I urge you, if people are burning skids, please phone and complain because it's not legal.
Exactly, Councillor McIntosh. I was going to say the same thing, that if there is incidences where people are witnessing people burning things like skids or pressure treated wood or anything that's causing billowing smoke, please report it to the fire department. They will go, they will investigate, they will put it out. If it's a continuous issue, they will fine them, they will charge them. Mr. Ugolini, did you want to add something? Your mic is no longer on. There we go.
Thank you. I show no disrespect to anybody here by wearing a cap. Some of you already know that the lights in here are pretty bright, and I guess my eyes are sensitive to the lights. So I just want you to know, I just don't show any, I'm not showing disrespect.
We take it as no disrespect at all. We're just glad that you're here. Thank you. Was there any additional questions? Councillor Sherwood.
Yeah, so back to this sensory receptor, I too have received some comments, and people were under the impression that our dialogue last time that we were trying to eliminate it. We had just made comments. We certainly never made any direction to staff. However, I know staff's going to be reporting back on this, and maybe I need to further educate myself, but I would believe under a burn permit, they're only permitted to burn a certain type of wood, correct? So if people are burning the correct type of wood, there shouldn't be this issue. So I would assume that if they're not burning that type of wood, bylaw can be called. And
they can just call the fire department directly, and the fire department will go and investigate if there's problems with burning.
Lay charge if charge need be.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
So yeah, that's one of the things, like I say, I think I need to educate myself more on the actual detail of that, and I would assume that that would be part of the report when we get that back.
And as part of the burn permit process, the fire department does walk an applicant through all of the items that they need. They inspect the area, they inspect where the fire pit's going to be to ensure that it's safe, to ensure that the home has smoke detectors, all of those things. So there is a full educational component that goes into registering for a burn permit.
And we definitely need to let the public know that if your neighbor's burning leaves or garbage, then call the fire department. Don't call 911.
No,
call
exactly.
the fire department.
Call the fire department. Mr. Ugolini, do you have something else to add? Just let us turn your mic on. Oh, Karen, I think that we've got it here. We got it. Go ahead, Mr. Ugolini.
Since you're talking about wood burning, I might as well bring this up. Now, oh boy. A solution to a burn permit. Now, what about, there's a lot of people in town that are burning without permits, and even people that burn with permits still don't know what they're doing because you're supposed to clean out your pit after use, and you're supposed to cover it so the rain doesn't get it on it and corrode the pit. which would cause toxins. So what about a fire safety course supplied?
We have our acting Chief Richardson here if he would like to answer any questions.
Well,
Come up. We'll find a spot for you. There we go. We'll put you on the spot.
Thank you, through you, Worship. Yeah, so part of the process is education. We do try to educate with the process in the intake process of the permit. Sometimes it does fall on deaf ears. Sometimes people burn out of convenience of what's laying around. But we do try to educate, and that's our first line of defense. Even when we get called to a residence where they are burning, education is our first thing with them.
Thank you, Chief.
Also, I have noticed in the odd town that fire permits are placed in the front window or door, so people know they have a burn permit. And with this, wouldn't it make less calls to the fire department and waste their service? If, say, for instance, well, if you got a burn permit in your front window, you're allowed to burn, you have a fire, there's no need to call.
There is still, though, if at any time somebody even with the burn permit is burning and it's bothersome to the neighbors for any reason, the fire department can still be called and the person has to produce a burn permit. And if they are burning something that falls outside of what they're allowed to burn, again, the fire department will be educating. So and at any time, their burn permit can also be revoked. The fire department has full discretion to be able to do that.
Is there a fine to go along with that?
Yes. Yeah.
The only way
yes, there is.
It's going to work is to find people, and then they realize it's money's coming out of their pocket, and the wood or the backyard fire isn't so cheap.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So stay tuned, Mr. Ulani. We're going to be looking at this whole program and seeing how we can make it better so that it is better for everybody in the community. Thank you. Okay, we will move on to item 12.3, which is the financial assistance policy update. The recommendation is that report CPS 2023-33 regarding financial assistance policy update be received and that council approve the updated financial assistance policy. Can I have a motion to that effect, please? Councillor Andrews, seconded by Councillor Prendergast. Was there questions from anybody on this one? No, all in favor? And that's carried unanimously. 12.4 is the Mobile Food Vendors Bylaw Housekeeping Amendment, CPS 2023-36. There's a recommendation that report CPS-2023-36, Mobile Food Vendor Bylaw Housekeeping Amendment be received and that council pass a bylaw to amend Bylaw 2008-102 as amended, being a bylaw to license, regulate, and govern mobile food and refreshment vending, to provide an exemption for mobile food vendors to not be required to get licensed under the Mobile Food Vendors Bylaw if they are operating under the oversight of a special event that has been issued a special events permit by the town. Can I have a motion to that effect, please? Councillor Andrews, seconded by Councillor Sherwood. Was there questions or comments on this item? Seeing none, I do know that we have a couple of members of the Legion today. I had spoken to Mr. Kimber earlier today about this item, so I was just going to turn it over perhaps to Ms. Khan to speak about some of the questions that we had. There was some intricacies within the bylaw that I know were of concern to the Legion, so I just wanted perhaps Ms. Khan to explain some of them.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So I can try to speak to a bit of it, and if I've missed some of it, by all means, please let me know if I'm missing the mark. So, from my understanding is that there is some concern with respect to not providing a fee reduction for local service clubs that are conducting fundraising events that want to use mobile food vendors as part of that fundraising event. Our mobile food vendor bylaw, as it stands right now, provides a reduction in fee for local charitable organizations, service clubs that are conducting fundraising events solely for the purposes of collecting those proceeds for that charitable purpose. So long as the organizers of the event are directly preparing the food and providing the food. If an organization is using a mobile food vendor for that fundraising event, then the bylaw requires that mobile food vendor donate all of the proceeds of that night or that event to that organization. That's what the bylaw speaks to currently. There is no fee reduction for if a for-profit mobile food vendor wants to operate at a fundraising event.
Thank you very much, Ms. Khan. If it's okay with council, I would like to invite Mr. Kimber. He did miss the deadline for delegation, but to just ask or make a comment if everybody's okay with that. Okay. Mr. Kimber, if you would like to, you can go ahead, approach the delegation booth and just turn the mic on there and share any additional concerns. I hope Ms. Khan helped to answer some of those questions, but.
Chair.
So can you just turn on the mic there, or can you turn on? It's on? Okay, we're good. Over to you, Mr. Kimber.
Your worship, thank you. Deputy Mayor Taylor, council members, staff, thank you for allowing me to speak. I'll just start that I'm the current president of the branch, and our Legion has been a part of this community for over 90 years. So I want people to understand when we're a nonprofit, we are a nonprofit, like a real nonprofit. We depend on these fundraisers in order to bring revenue into our branch to pay our bills. And I don't think any of you would understand that with a 35% increase in insurance this year and all the increases that were happening, going from $11,000 to $17,000 a year in insurance in our property, we need these events to happen. Now, try to compare what I think is apples to apples. When you have an event like the Orangeville Blues and Jazz Festival, which is identified as a nonprofit, right in your advertising, or you operate the Rotary Club and Ribfest, which is also identified as a nonprofit. The Rotary Club is a nonprofit. That when these mobile vendors are in town property, they don't have to pay any licensing fees. I think there's inconsistency there, simply because Orangeville Legion has this little spot over there. You know, we want to hold a parking lot party, hire a band. I think some of you even came out last year to our events, and they were marvelous. But revenue of close to $10,000 will pay a lot of our bills. I don't have the money at the end of this year to pay our insurance bill in June, first week of June. You know, we were planning on having two events in June. One event in June and one event in July. We tried to find a mobile vendor that is accommodates our type of presentation as far as food is concerned under the AGCO and everything else and the requirements in that way. And to ask this individual to come in and pay a full licensing fee of $600 to do two events, I think is ridiculous. Simply because we're a nonprofit. He's not coming in here to do other events in the community, even though he does go do the Rib Fest, and he has gone over and done the blues and jazz and things like that. He was never asked to pay any fees. He wasn't asked to donate any of his money to the organization. We're asking him to donate all his money to us in order so we can get a special occasion permit. That doesn't work. I know that the bylaw states what it states, but it's not consistent to what all the nonprofits are here in Orangeville. The Blues and Jazz Festival is profiting and doing well with their event. The Rotary Club is doing well with their event. When you have your food down on what's the street there where the Orangeville Library is? Yeah, Mill Street. There's a lot of income that comes on there. I guarantee you, none of that money isn't going back to the town of Orangeville, even though it's on town property. So what I'm looking for is I'm looking for consistency right across the board. And I don't see the consistency right across the board. Just because we're not holding our event on town property. Your Worship, we've talked about this, and I fully understand what the bylaw states, but the bylaw does not accommodate what the nonprofits are here in Orangeville. It only accommodates some things. And it makes it unreasonable that I may have to go and pay this guy's licensing fee for $600 out of our revenue in order to get him to come to run his truck in our place. Not to mention the commitment to, we hired Itchy and Scratchy, and we hired a couple other bands. You know, they need 30 days notice in order to, or they go off and we lose our deposits. So, so we're pushed back into a corner now. And I would love to entertain any questions that you have for me. I think I've spoken enough.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kimber. And just so council's aware, this housekeeping amendment today doesn't change anything that's already been in the bylaw that way. So for last year, it had the Legion use the same food vendor that they're looking to use this year. The price would be exactly what it is this year. So this amendment doesn't actually touch that. It's just that last year it was a different truck that was already licensed. So that's why it's come up now. But I will turn it over, Councillor McIntosh, for questions.
Thank you. Not really a question, just a comment. I think we should be bending over backwards for our Legion. I think we need to find a way to fix this. If it's not approving this tonight, I don't know the answer, but I think we need to see what we can come up with, because the Legion is a non-profit, and that's a fact. Thank you.
Ms. Khan?
Thank you, Your Worship. If I could just offer a couple of points of clarification. Part of the distinction between having not requiring that mobile food vendors that operate under the oversight of a special event permit is because it's not so much due to their status of not being a nonprofit, it's more so about we know that the special events permit process requires them to go through certain due diligence to ensure health and safety insurance, all those types of things are in place. So the mobile food vendor bylaw requirements become redundant, and there's no real requirement for us to go through that process and make them do that paperwork for all of that stuff twice. It just doesn't really make a lot of sense. Of course, it's always something that we can look at and report back on as to what can be done with respect to perhaps widening the provisions for nonprofits and how they operate their fundraising events. But I will say that to do the fee reduction, that could perhaps also provide a disincentive for the mobile food vendors that do pay the $600 to be licensed annually to operate beyond fundraisers. Because what could potentially be the case is that they will come asking to get a $25 license up to 24 times. And we're issuing 24 licenses potentially, right? So there is a balance to be struck there. But it's certainly something that we can look at to see what that right balance is for Orangeville.
Well, and perhaps one of the items that council could look at this time around too is the Legion could apply for a community grant in the amount of $600 to cover those licensing fees this time around. And that will give us some time, and it will give you some time to figure out how we move forward for another year. But that could be something that we look at as well, is considering a community grant. Councillor Prendergast, do you have a question or comment? Go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor Post. I was actually going to suggest that perhaps Mr. Kimber apply for a one-time community grant that would help you out this year while we work on something for next year. Great minds.
Can I just further comment, please?
Sure, go ahead, Mr. Kimber.
I understand, like there's two fees here. This is a special event food vendor for $144 for non-resident, and then there's a special fundraising event only for $25. The gentleman was willing to pay the $144 for licensing as a non-resident, and that still was declined too. Because they say he was told he wasn't qualified for that end too. Even though he's gone through the process of getting the insurance, which is required by the town, he's also got his approval from the Dufferin Wellington Health Unit, and he's gone through that process and getting, so he's done all the work.
Ms. Khan?
through your worship, perhaps there could be consideration with respect to a grant request just to assist with the event this year. And if council would just give us maybe a little bit of time to look into it further, we'd definitely be able to report back. And one thing I forgot to mention, my apologies, is that we will be looking at the mobile food vendor bylaw, reviewing it in its entirety, starting at the end of this year into early 2024.
Wonderful. So in the meantime, perhaps we can have Ms. Khan reach out to Mr. Kimber after the fact, and we can keep this communication going.
Sure.
So hopefully we'll find a solution for you this year, Mr. Kimber, and we'll work on finding something that's going to work better going forward. I appreciate your feedback and your calls today.
I thank for your assistance and also for your help in trying to resolve this problem. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Okay, so at this time, we do have a motion on the floor, moved and seconded. Was there any final questions or comments on that item? All in favor? And that is carried unanimously. We now have 12.5, which is a fire service update. The recommendation is that report CMS 2023-12 fire service update be received. Can I have a mover for that one, please? Councillor Stevens and Councillor McIntosh. Questions or comments on this item? No questions or comments. I was just going to make the comment that I thought it was really great to see the improvement in response times and just the overall composition of training and all of those components. So thank you for the report. I think it was really, really well done. Deputy Mayor?
Sorry, Your Worship. So I was kind of gathering my thoughts as we went through this. So I appreciate the report. So thank you very much for it. You know, the cynic in me says, of course. Right? Like, you know, of course we're going to spin it like this. Like there's extra training and we've got the increased fire levels and whatnot. The thing for me is there was such controversy about this item years ago. None of us were sitting on council when this came up, but there was an expenditure that went out for full-time people to be here. And I always kind of want to put an ROI on it. And I don't know how we put an ROI on it. Like what would have happened if we didn't do this? I guess you're going to tell me we would have been legislated to do it. People would have died. Like, is this where we're going to go? But like, to me, in all honesty, I think it was a bad decision at the time. I don't think they had the information that was available. And I think we lucked into the spot that we're here now and the fact that we've got extra training and we've reduced the measures that we have. What would you say to that, Chief Richardson? Like, I love the fire department. I'm trying to be a turkey here, but it just seems like it was it's a half-assed decision at the time. I watched it very close. You're nodding your head too. Former chief is nodding his head at my saying it's a half-assed decision, and we got lucky that we're sitting here today. That's my premise. Am I crazy?
Acting Chief, go ahead.
Your Worship, to Deputy Taylor. On a side note, yes, you're crazy, but that's another story. Back to your question, fire services is a very difficult thing to judge. Nobody has the crystal ball, as we once heard in this council chamber before. It's a ticking time bomb. Time is essence of everything within the fire service. It's risk versus reward, and to a lot of degree. We've been very fortunate that the reward has paid off for us in many ways, and we have a top-notch fire service to this day. And moving forward, there's a lot of challenges ahead, and by having the staff and the ability to overcome the forward challenges, we'll be in pretty good shape. So if that's how it looks as a good luck thing, then we lucked out real well.
Was there any additional questions or comments on this report? Yeah, Councillor McIntosh.
Thank you. Just for clarification, I think that previous council saved our bacon because we'd have had to make this decision ourselves now. I think it was time. I don't necessarily agree it was time when it was done, but it certainly would have been in the very near future. So thank you, previous council.
Any additional questions or comments? Okay, all in favor of receipt of the report? That's carried unanimously. Next up, you may as well stay where you are, Acting Chief, is the aerial fire truck request. There's a recommendation that report CMS 2023-13 aerial fire truck request be received, and that council approve the shortfall of $535,632 from the following funding sources. RF Fire Fleet, $100,000, RF Police Fleet, $185,000, and RF General capital, 250,632 for a total shortfall of 535,632, and that council approve the reallocation of the police fleet reserve fund in the amount of 185,000 towards the Orangeville Fire Aerial Truck, and that council approve the 2024 and 2025 amounts previously approved in principle through the 2023 budget process of 700,000 from the following funding sources: DCRF Fire 200,000, external financing 500,000, total funding to be approved $700,000. Can I have a motion, Deputy Mayor, and seconded by Councillor Andrews? Deputy Mayor, question?
Yes, thank you, Worship. So first off, it's such a shame because here we are again with gun to our ear. And I think the number one battle that this council has now is inflation, right? It's a war on inflation. Folks that are watching at home think we're drunken sailors. There's not much you can do here. We've got this. I feel like if we don't approve it now, we're going to wait a couple more months and this thing's going to be more expensive. So the ship has sailed on that for me. I just think it's so interesting. And I just so council knows, I did have a conversation with Ms. Savage earlier today, and I was asking the question about the police fleet line. Such a shame to see a police fleet line still there 3-ish years after we've closed a business. Sitting in the file. So I thought I understood it today, Ms. Savage, and I appreciate you looking into it. It's not, you weren't here, not at you, I'm just trying to understand the question. But I don't think that's all that it is, the way I reread our conversation through email. There's more in that fund, but I don't understand how much more is in the fund. How much more is there, and are we taking that to general reserves for next year too? Am I asking the wrong person? It's her stuff, so I wanted to follow up there. But it's such an odd bucket, right? So if Mandeep wanted to answer.
We turn it over to Mandeep or to Ms. Savage? Mandeep, go ahead.
Hi,
Welcome.
Thank you. Hi, through you, Mayor Post, to Deputy Mayor Taylor. So in the reserve fund for the police fleet, the total amount that we have is this full amount that's showing here is 185,000 for the police fleet reserves. There is that's everything. That's the total amount.
Deputy Mayor, go ahead.
So there's no other funds within that. I keep calling it a business. There's no other funds in the OPS account. That's it?
So.
No, there is more. Okay.
Sorry.
Go ahead, Mandeep. Yep.
Okay. Yes. So in the police fleet, this is everything, but there is also just the police reserve, and that has 99,000, which is still sitting there. So there is 99,000 available under that. This one here, because it's a fleet reserve, we recommended reallocating this to the fire fleet, the aerial truck.
Can I just add? Sorry.
Go ahead, Ms. Innes.
That will be cleaned up at budget time. So all those accounts, to your point, Deputy Mayor, should have been consolidated when you transitioned. And so it will be cleaned up for this budget process.
Councillor Sherwood?
Yes, through you, Your Worship. I'm very much in support of the aerial truck. We've gone this far. We know that costs go up. Not surprised about the shortfall. However, just a couple of reports before, we were just given this good news story about a $5.8 million surplus. My concern here is we want to take from this reserve and that reserve and this reserve and this reserve. I don't like seeing there's a proposed for external financing when we're just putting $5.8 million in our bank account. Could we not fund this $535,000 from that $5.8 million tonight rather than taking it from our reserves?
Mandeep, over to you. You are muted.
Sorry, through you, Mayor Post. So the recommendation was written before we had the surplus amount that came out of the 2022 financial statements. If council wishes to fund the full shortage from the general capital reserves, we can do that if that's what council would like to do.
Councillor Sherwood, are you just proposing that rather than the external financing piece, the 500,000 be funded through general capital reserves where we've just, or general reserves where we've just put that surplus?
I would like to see that 535 come out of that surplus.
The full amount?
Yes. And then I would imagine the external financing for the 500,000, that looks to me like it's in next year's budget.
Correct.
So we can discuss that then. But I would like to see this shortfall come out of that money tonight, so that we're not taking from reserves here, there, and everywhere.
Ms. Landry?
I will do my best to answer this, and perhaps Mandeep can add on to it if she feels necessary. So if I understand correctly, for this evening, you want to take the shortfall from the surplus that was voted on earlier this evening. That's one item. The second item, I think you're asking about whether we should be taking from reserves in the forecast as it relates to this particular purchase of the fire truck. Is that correct?
Can I jump in with one comment as well? So two of the items, or two of the locations, are coming from fleet funds, which are specifically reserves used for fleet. The remaining is coming from general capital, which is where we put the 5.8 million anyways. So it's coming out of the same reserve fund that we just added the surplus to.
I'm still liking my original thought is to have it all come out and that leave our fleet reserve so that we don't have to finance next year.
We can. I think I know what I think.
Okay, Ms. Landry, over to you.
What's going to be said? I think what we're going to say is, if you could leave that with us as part of the budget process, we'll bring that to you and we can discuss it further at budget time for next budget cycle.
Ms. Ennis, do you have something to add?
You shouldn't really be dealing with next year's budget item today. So I think what Ms. Landry is suggesting is if you leave it as is, it's except for taking away from the fleets, the police fleet, that needs to be cleaned up. That needs to go back into the reserves anyways. So I would recommend using that and cleaning up that while we have it. The fire fleet has been accumulating, and that's what its purpose is for. And then the general capitals, that surplus has moved into there. So for this purpose, for this payment, I think that the allocation is fine, but I see your point for maybe in the budget, you're going to want to see us not borrow the money in the next budget cycle, right? You'll want us to use that $5 million surplus at that point. So when the request comes for the funding in the next budget cycle, it'll come out of the general capital as opposed to as a loan.
Councillor Sherwood, does that work?
Yeah, so I guess what I'm trying to say, I see the fire fleet reserve, 100,000, the police fleet, 185,000. And yes, okay, we've just put the 5.8 million in the general capital. My hope was to not touch that 285 so that we can deal with it when they're asking to do external financing next year for 500,000. So that's why I was hoping that we could consider leaving those fleet reserves as they are. We know we want to clean up the police fleet in the next budget. We do know that. Let's give it to the fire. But I would still like to see I would like to leave the fleet reserves so that we can deal with it so we don't have to borrow in 2014. That's my concern.
2014 was a long time ago. We can't fix that yet. I think that Ms. Landry has taken the note away that we're not going to borrow that money. So I think that is okay, left alone. Ms. Landry?
Yes, I've taken the note, and what we will do is we will present a full picture in terms of where we recommend you take funds from or not, and whether it's by way of debt during the budget process. So if I've taken the note, so if you could leave it with us, we will certainly report back to you during the budget process on that.
Okay, so the suggestion is to leave the motion on the floor as is. Councillor Sherwood, are you okay with that? We'll leave the fleet, we'll leave it coming from fleet and then the rest from general capital at this point? Or did you want to put an amendment forward that we can vote on before the original motion? Are you sure? Floor is open if you want to add it.
Because I will be voting against it only because
Okay.
I don't want it coming out of reserves, but that's okay. You can vote on it the way it is.
Okay. Deputy Mayor?
Yes, thank you, Worship. I hear where Councillor Sherwood's coming from. It's just that the fleet is where that should come from. It makes sense that you would deplete a fund that's called fleet, because that's what we're doing, is it's a fleet. So I appreciate the data. I don't like that either. I would prefer that we take the surplus and whatnot, but the two RF lines, if anything, you could add, and I think you're making a mound out of a molehill now. I don't mean you, Councillor Sherwood, I mean us. But, you can almost take the 90 some odd thousand in the police fleet line as well and put that in there and say, okay, this is all fleet. But I'm not sure it matters because of what Ms. Landry is suggesting. But I would say it should come out of the fleet lines as well. And I don't think it matters at this point.
Okay. Was there additional questions or comments on this item? Councillor McIntosh, sorry.
Thank you. Changing the subject. Is there any resale value for a ladder truck? I know it's being kept in very good shape and it's just a question of it being too old. But is there any, I know in the past fire trucks got very little for trade-in value, but is there any hope of getting anything for selling that?
Acting Chief Richardson?
Through your worship to Councillor McIntosh, there could possibly be a little bit of money left in the vehicle. Right now, there isn't a real big market. We're not seeing a real market for those types of vehicles. In saying that, in 2026, there's a new EPA emissions control systems. There are a lot of buyers and sellers of vehicles, fleet vehicles, that will be looking for older type vehicles to get away from the EPA emission control systems. But possibly at that time, when we're ready to trade it in, there could possibly be a little bit of money coming back in regards to the sale of the present day aerial truck.
Does that help? Okay. Was there any additional questions? Okay, we will call the vote then. All in favor? And any opposed? So just Councillor Sherwood opposed. Moving on to 12.7 is the appointment of fire chief. The recommendation is that report CPS 2023-15, fire chief appointment be received, that in accordance with section 6-1 of the Fire Protection and Prevention Act and Town of Orangeville bylaw 2001-92, being a bylaw to establish and regulate the town's fire department, Michael Richardson be appointed as acting fire chief. Can I have a motion, please? Councillor Stevens and Councillor McIntosh, questions or comments? Deputy Mayor?
I can't help myself. So I've known this individual since I moved to town, and I just want to say congratulations, my friend. That's it. Just really happy for you and happy for Orangeville.
Councillor Stevens?
Through your worship, I echo Deputy Mayor Taylor's comments. I've known Michael for a long time, and I'm sure he'll step in and do a great role.
And thank you, Acting Chief Richardson. You've done a fantastic job so far. Thank you for stepping into the leadership role very quickly and taking on some really big jobs and some big reports that Deputy Mayor is always asking you for. So thank you for that. Any additional questions or comments? All in favor? And that is carried unanimously. Congratulations and thank you. Item 12.8, there's a recommendation that report CMS 2023-17 Library Building Reserve be received and that council approve the library board's request to access the library building reserve to a maximum of $52,000 to cover the cost of tile flooring on the lower level of 1 Mill Street and artistic branding, and that council contribute up to 1/3 of the cost to complete the facility needs assessment study from the library building reserve in collaboration with Facilities Recreation to a maximum of $75,000. Can I have a motion to that effect, please? Councillor Andrews, seconded by Councillor Sherwood. Any questions or comments on this item from anybody? Deputy Mayor?
I just can't help myself. Like, it feels like we sort of fumbled the ball on this library reserve thing as we went through the budget process and whatnot. And it also feels funny to me. I know it's a ceremonial thing that we do this, but the reality is the library board does their own thing. They don't report to us. We just sort of rubber stamp these things because they're under their own rules. So it feels funny to me to even talk about it. So, I just kind of want to make that point that this isn't really for us. It has to come here, but it's not really for us.
Ms. Savage?
Through you, Mayor Post, to Deputy Mayor Taylor. Yeah, it's a bit of housekeeping. There was $100,000 approved from to be used from the library reserves through the 2023 budget deliberations. We're just going back and now making sure that the library board is supportive of this, and then it comes back to council. If you've noticed, we changed the amount from 100,000 to 75,000. This is reflective of we've broken this facility needs assessment study into 3 parts: Tony Rose, Alder, and the library. So each component should be paid a third of the cost. And so the library has committed to up to $75,000 for their portion, or 1/3 of the feasibility study. The other 2/3 will be coming from town reserves to pay for the feasibility study, reflective of Alder and Tony Rose.
Thank you, Ms. Savage. Any additional questions or comments? I will call the vote. All in favor? And that's carried unanimously. 12.9 is the Fare Free Transit update. There's a recommendation that report INS 2023-35 Fare Free Transit update be received. Can I have a motion? Councillor McIntosh, seconded by Councillor Andrews. Any questions or comments? Councillor Andrews and then Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Your Worship. I just wanted to make a comment, and I want to thank staff for the amount of data that they've provided here for this report. This is encouraging news. I think that, not to say that there were a number of people in our community that criticized council's decision, but I still stand by our decision. I think this is an absolute win for our community. And I know anecdotally, we've had a number of people in our community who've made some positive comments. Number one, many who would not have been able to use the transit now are. We see the numbers, and the data ends up validating the decision. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Andrews. Deputy Mayor.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. So in the time that I've known Mayor Post, this would be the most polar opposite that we've ever been on each other on an issue, and to the point where we couldn't even speak in the car one day going to a meeting. But all fun aside, I'm so pleased to see that I'm wrong on the stats. I'm very pleased to see that I could end up paying my beer bet to the mayor. I'd be thrilled to pay up. The piece for me that's missing, and we still need to understand, is what's the ultimate financials in terms of what is the gas tax? And that'll be the point. On that night, I will eat my hat and say that you were right. But at this point, I would call this inconclusive. It's exciting. It looks like you're more right than I am, Your Worship, but we don't know the financials, and that'll be the day. So I look forward to that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I was definitely encouraged to see the ridership numbers increase as much as they have. And anecdotally, as Councillor Andrews alluded to, I've heard a lot of comments, positive comments from people in our community. And the one that I think was the most positive, unintended consequence was from our senior community, who specifically have told me multiple times from several people that now, instead of just using transit once a week that they've budgeted for to go do their groceries and come home, they're now doing their groceries, coming home, leaving their stuff at home, and going back out, taking the bus again, going downtown, meeting friends. So it's good from so many different perspectives, from a social inclusion perspective, and just making sure that people are able to get around the community, and that's the intended benefit of our transit system. So thank you for the report. It's very encouraging to see. Councillor Sherwood.
Yes, Your Worship. I too want to say that I was really pleased to see this percentage. I kind of looked at it a few times and thought it's phenomenal. I too am interested to see how this will affect us financially. I didn't even really need to see this percentage. I just know in perception, I've seen the bus have more people there. I drive by the shelters and I see, rather than one person sitting there, maybe a half a dozen or so, which is really good. And you mentioned, Your Worship, about seniors, and you shared a story with us about a young individual, which was rather nice, thanking us for providing free transit so that his parents can go to work. So that was quite a touching piece of correspondence. So anyhow, this is great news.
Yeah, I mean, every now and then in our role as council, we get a really good feel-good story, and that was sure one of them. So was there any additional questions or comments on this report? I look forward to the next one. Hopefully we'll see another one soon and increased ridership. I'll call the vote. All in favor? And that's carried unanimously. Item 355A Broadway Residential Demolition Permit Application. The recommendation is that report INS 2023-40 355A Broadway Residential Demolition Permit Application RD-2022-02 be received, and that residential demolition application RD-2022-02 be approved, subject to the following conditions. Number one, that site plan application SPA-2022-01 be approved, and a site plan agreement be executed prior to the issuance of any demolition permits, and that the applicant constructs and substantially completes the new building to be erected on the subject property no later than 2 years from the date of issuance of the demolition permit, and that a construction waste management plan be implemented by the developer. Can I have a motion, please? Councillor Andrews, seconded by Councillor McIntosh. Questions or comments? Councillor Andrews?
Thank you. I know that many of us on council have been monitoring the demands of our community and those from outside of our community from a long-term care perspective, and we do have some very good, very strong long-term care facilities, but we do have a growing demand. And I know that Councillor McIntosh and I have had some offline discussions about that, especially with the committee that he is a part of. I really think this is great news. This is very good news to see, and that's all I have to say. You know, 160 additional beds helps our community enormously, and anyone else that may be requiring that service at some point.
Absolutely. Thank you, Councillor Andrews. Any additional questions or comments? Yeah, Deputy Mayor?
Through your worship to Mr. Ward. Mr. Ward, when would we have got an appraisal done on the property? Do we get an appraisal done at the beginning, and then as we get to demolish or go to demolition, do we get another appraisal done? Does the owner would come with an appraisal? Does the town get an appraisal as well? And, you know, why I'd ask that is, you know, there would be different tax rates and whatnot depending upon the values. And I'm starting to understand that this might be something that we're missing out on as we go. So maybe this is the example, and then is this something we should do as we go forward, force people to get a second appraisal?
Mr. Ward?
Thank you, Your Worship, and through you. So with respect to an appraisal, that's something we would obtain through the site plan process. That's with respect to determining any cash in lieu of parkland dedication. It's not to determine assessment, et cetera. It's really to look at the value of the land for the purpose of calculating the cash in lieu contribution. It's done later in the site plan process when we're ready to finalize and execute a site plan agreement. That's where we stipulate that obligation.
Deputy Mayor, is that good? Does that answer your question? Do you have a follow-up?
I'd like to take it offline with you at some point, Mr. Ward, and just make sure I understand the process. I get what you're saying for this one, and I'm just wondering if there might be something that we're missing out as we go forward, and perhaps I don't grasp it. So I'll take it offline. Thank you.
Okay. Mr. Ward, do you have an additional comment or no?
Yes, thank you, Your Worship, and again through you. I think you asked who submits it. It's the developer that submits it. We review it in terms of its validity and appropriateness as part of the process.
Deputy Mayor?
But we don't get our own, right?
No, we do not.
Should we?
Again, that's something we could take a look at, but traditionally the practice has been the applicant does prepare that, and it's prepared at their expense. We review it in terms of its methodology and appropriateness, and satisfactory, we accept it and calculate the cash in lieu of parkland on.
Mm-hmm. Just so everyone doesn't think I'm crazy tonight, the reason I'm asking again is because I would go and get an appraisal for my home. I would say to the appraiser, this is all hypothetical, I wouldn't do this, but you know, hey, my house is actually worth $5 million, wink, wink, nudge, nudge. I get the extra appraisal, off I go. And then we don't necessarily get that play in. So they could say, hey, it's worth less. They could say it's worth more, whatever benefits them and whatever they're trying to achieve. And the town doesn't share in that. And that's why I'm asking. That's why I'm asking the question. I'm wondering if we should be doing that.
Mr. Ward?
It's a fair comment, and certainly something we look at when we review these appraisal documents submitted to us. We understand there's, you know, some sensitivity around valuations presented and the motives behind them, but also we understand that these are submitted by professionals that have their obligations to meet when they're preparing these reports. In our parkland dedication bylaw, we do have a provision in there that allows us to obtain a third-party peer reviewer if we're going through a review dialogue and we feel that there's just not something aligned with this, and we feel it's necessary to bring in a third party. But with that said, that's more process and more cost on the applicant as well.
Thank you, Mr. Ward. Was there any additional questions or comments? No, seeing none, I'll call the vote. All in favor? And that's carried unanimously. Item 12.11 is the agreement with Dufferin County for the transit terminal. The recommendation is that report INS-2023-41, agreement with Dufferin County for transit terminal, be received, and that council direct the mayor and clerk to sign the memo of understanding in substantially the same format as the one attached to this report, and to the satisfaction of the general managers of infrastructure services and of corporate services, setting out the terms and conditions for future land use and easement agreements between the town of Orangeville and the county of Dufferin for the use of the property at 30 Center Street, the Edelbrock Center lands. Can I have a motion, please? Councillor Sherwood and Councillor McIntosh. Questions or comments? Nope, seeing none. All in favor? And that's carried unanimously. There is correspondence, a proclamation request from Aging Well in Dufferin. The recommendation is that that correspondence be received. Can I have a motion, please? Councillor Andrews and Councillor Prendergast. Questions or comments? All in favor? And that's carried unanimously. There is only one committee and board minute. It is from Heritage Orangeville Committee from March 16th. Recommendation that the minutes be received. Can I have a motion, please? Councillor Andrews, seconded by Councillor McIntosh. Questions or comments on the minutes? All in favor? And that's carried unanimously. Any notices? There was no notice of motion submitted prior to meeting. Was there any notices of motion here tonight? Seeing none. Any items of new business? Councillor Andrews, then Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Your Worship. I want to just thank very much our new official acting fire chief for the opportunity for members of council to attend and observe some training activity that took place at the fire hall this past week. For someone who's been at arm's length connected to post-secondary education fire training, it was really something special to see the dedication of not only your full-time complement, but your volunteer group who are there learning about what it takes to provide proper fire service in our community. And again, kudos for you and your team who were able to have the mobile unit from the Ontario Fire College on site. It was truly impressive. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Andrews. Deputy Mayor.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. So I just wanted to announce tonight to the public, the Orangeville Police Services Board has received a request from member Mary Rose, and member Mary Rose has decided to resign from the Police Services Board. Ms. Rose was former mayor, did lots of wonderful things for our town, and she will be highly missed on the board. So the board will receive that information tomorrow night, but I also did send a note to this council ahead of time to let them know. There is nothing for this council to do because it's a provincial appointment and the province has been informed as such, and the province will make up their mind who sits on the board. Not anyone at this table, nor will the Police Services Board do that. So just wanted to share that with everybody publicly.
Thank you very much, Deputy Mayor, and thank you to Ms. Mary Rose for her service on the board. She's been an exceptional member. Councillor Sherwood?
Yes, through your worship, to Deputy Mayor. Will she be staying on until a replacement, or is this effective immediately?
Deputy Mayor? Effective immediately, and she will not attend the next meeting.
Was there any additional items of new business? Seeing none? We are into the time where it's question period. Is there any members of the public connecting via telephone? No, there is none. Any members in the gallery who wish to speak? Mr. Jackson, come on up. If you would just like to have a seat, turn on your mic and then state your name and address, please, for the record. Oh, the mic is already on for you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chuck.
Actually, mine is, it's a concern as well as.
James, can you just state your name and address for the record, please?
James Jackson, 50 Carlton Drive.
Thank you. Go ahead.
It's a concern as well as a solution to an issue. My wife, given an example, this weekend she went to the farmer's market, and I found that, or she concerned to me that accessibility, it was hard for her to get to it. Because when we do it at the side of the side of the town hall here, it has already taken up an accessibility parking spot, and that's actually taken up 2 of them. My proposal and thought to this is that when we block off the turn lane that's out in front of the town hall here, on Broadway is if we make temporary parking, accessible parking spots. And then at the side of the town hall here is that we can actually make it for like wheelchairs, because they need the ramp space, and we could do it at the, and we have the space for the, in the alleyway, because they need the flat surface to come down for the wheelchairs and that. People who use myself like a walking stick or a cane and that, or a walker, they can park in that spot that I'm saying in the turning lane. So then that way we're making 4 accessibility parking spots for people to come down and enjoy the farmers market or any activities that we have in the town. And that way we have true EDI as well as accessibility for everyone involved. That's just my thought and a solution to this issue.
Thank you very much, Mr. Jackson. Appreciate that. I will turn it over to Councillor Stevens as chair of the Accessibility Committee to make a comment.
Thank you. Through your worship. So Mr. Jackson reached out to me prior to bringing this, and thank you very much. And I reached out to staff, and they have they're going to bring recommendations forward. And I know I talked to Mr. Deluce, and he probably has a comment that he'd like to share. Thank you.
Over to you.
Thank you, Your Worship, and thank you for bringing that to our attention. We were not aware of that situation, and Councillor Stevens, through the Accessibility Committee, did make me aware of that earlier, so I thank you for that. We would like to perhaps chat with you a little bit more to better understand what the needs are. My initial thought was that we could set up a temporary accessible spot for persons such as yourself and to assist. But certainly I'd like to discuss that with you through Councillor Stevens, just to better understand what you're up against so we can try to accommodate.
Thank you, Mr. Deluce. Is there any additional questions or comments? Councillor Stevens?
And we do have a meeting this Thursday, so I know it'll be on the agenda.
I know that through the last term of council, we did discuss the idea of temporary accessible parking under event time. So there may actually already be something started in the clerk's office from that. I'm not sure, but they may have kind of started to do the pre-work by the end of last accessibility term, because we were looking into it. So any additional questions or comments from anybody here? No. Thank you very much, Mr. Jackson. Appreciate your time. Was there any other members of the public wishing to ask a question tonight at question period?
Question.
Go ahead, Mr. Ugolini.
The ladder truck. Now, I understand that it was budgeted for 1.5 million. Now, does that mean it's now $2 million? Because you're looking at a 500 plus thousand shortfall? It's gone up that much. And
Acting Chief, do you know the exact amount that we're looking for off the top of your head? Come on up.
Thank you. Through your worship. So the actual number turns out to be 2.7, just over 2.7.
Thank you.
So it was a 3-year project. So I believe we're in 2023. So it's 1.4 for this year.
Yeah.
And then moving forward to 24 and 25, an additional 7. Yeah, additional 7 for over the 2 years. And then we have another ask of 500, completing it to 2.7.
Yep, the cost of the trucks went up quite a bit. Inflation is a killer. Was there any additional question? Oh, go ahead, Acting Chief.
Maybe just a quick explanation on the fire truck market. It's probably one of the most upside down industries right now. Increases. So in 2022, there was an increase of 24% for the same vehicle we were looking at. Historically, fire vehicles had a 2 to 3% increase per year. Heading into COVID, we've seen unprecedented amounts. And just recently returning from the Ontario Fire Chiefs trade show and conference, many manufacturers, their actually increases are 2% a month moving forward.
Thank you very much, Acting Chief. Oh, Councillor Sherwood, go ahead.
Yes, Your Worship. So just to address the actual cost is 2.8 million, but we're taking advantage of a reduction because of the, if we can pay some money now. So brings it down to 2.7. So it's actually 2.8, over 2.8, correct?
Through your worship to Councillor Sherwood. So we leveraged a GPO, so a group organizing, purchasing. The actual vehicle came in at 2.9. And so through it's called Canoe Sourcewell, the group we used. So there was a dealer discount, a manufacturer discount, which brought it down, but we're also using the 1.4 that was allotted this year to give us another discount of, I think it was approximately $126,000.
Thank you very much, Acting Chief. Councillor Stevens. Get comfortable,
Sorry.
Acting Chief. Maybe it's for you as well.
It is.
Okay.
Through your worship. I should have asked earlier. How long will that truck last for once it's here and in service?
20 to 25 years, similar to what we're operating now. Insurance ratings, the FOOS rating, insurance for the town, it's the maximum of 25, but depending on how well the unit works. And as we see typically, so an example being, our trucks run the highway brine from the roads department and into the outskirts of Orangeville. We're seeing detrimental effects to our vehicles, and the bodies are being eaten away.
Thank you.
Thank you. I think you're good now. Okay. For now. Okay, so we will go into bylaws. Recommendation is that the bylaws listed below be read 3 times and finally passed. 19.1 is the bylaw to amend bylaw 2008-102 as amended to regulate and govern mobile food and refreshment vending. 19.2 is the bylaw to appoint Michael Richardson as acting fire chief for the town of Orangeville. 19.3 is a bylaw to authorize the entering into and execution of a memorandum of understanding with the Corporation of the County of Dufferin for the development of the town of Orangeville Transit Terminal. 19.4 is the bylaw to confirm the proceedings of the Council of the Corporation of the Town of Orangeville at its regular council meeting held tonight, May 15th. Can I have a motion, please? Councillor Andrews and Deputy Mayor, questions or comments? All in favor? And that's carried unanimously. And a motion to adjourn, Councillor McIntosh and Councillor Stevens. All in favor? Carried unanimously. Have a wonderful evening, everyone. Thank you.